Okay, welcome everybody. Today is January 23rd, 2020. This is a meeting of the Upper Dublin School District Finance Committee. Just briefly, this is the first meeting that we are, of this version of the committee. We're calling it the Finance Committee, though it does still include operations, transportation, facilities. It was just too big a mouthful to include all of that, and everyone reports up through the Chief Financial Officer, so that seems like the logical name. The members of this committee are myself as the chair, Stan Rapsky, Mike Henderson, and Amy Francek as the president of the board, although she's not present tonight. So welcome everybody, let's get started. Do we have any announcements, Mr. Leckman?
There are no announcements.
Okay, we do have meetings from the December 12th meetings of the separate Operations Committee and Finance Committee. If anyone has changes to those, please get them to Brooke, and they'll be approved Monday night at the legislative meeting. And let's get right into presentations. First up, Dr. Yanni, do you want to introduce this one?
So tonight we're really pleased to have Dr. Kathleen Plesnarski with us. She's the Executive Director of Eastern Center for Arts and Technology. For the board's information, students in grades 10, 11, and 12 have the opportunity to attend any number of programs at Eastern. And Dr. Plesnarski is here this evening, and she's going to walk through some information, budgetary and otherwise, for the upcoming school year. So with that, Dr. Plesnarski, you can take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Yanni. This is the first time I've ever used a microphone for such a small group. I hope everyone can hear me in the back. I'm really honored to be out here and talk about the school. Eastern Center for Arts and Technology, while I've only been there for 10 months, is near and dear to my heart. I've worked in career and technical education for 21 years. I was a math teacher, actually a graduate of Penn State, and I just fell in love with career and technical education and what it does for students. So tonight we're really here to just give a little bit of an overview of our school and what's going on, but really focus heavily on our budget, because there are some nuances or changes this year that might be a little bit different than what you're used to. This is the first time that we're assessing our districts for capital expenditures, including that in the budget with a different funding formula. So we want to make sure that everyone leaves here tonight and has a good understanding of it. So just a little bit of a background on career and technical education. People always say, do we have to have career and technical education? What's the benefit? Career and technical education is positively related to higher attendance rates, increased graduation rates, which I don't think there are things that Upper Dublin really needs to worry about. But it is not a privilege for students in Pennsylvania. It's a right of students in Pennsylvania to pursue career and technical education. Pennsylvania has a very robust secondary system for career and technical education, and we would like you to view us. We are co-owned and operated by 9 districts, Upper Dublin being one of them. So we are literally an extension of your school and your programming. I just want to talk a little bit about Upper Dublin students. We don't enroll a lot of Upper Dublin students. There are about 32 in our building this year. I want to highlight some positives in the data. In 2018-19, 100% of your completers earned an industry certification that would make them more employable for the workforce. You also have really good metrics when it comes to placement after high school. 81.8% of your students were placed positively after high school based on a survey we administer in October. And your completion rate's a little bit above average. And then the kids that you send us have higher than what we see with other schools in our community in terms of retention, meaning that once they're in a program in our school, they're not switching a program or leaving and coming back to your school. So some really exciting things are happening at Eastern. And if you've taken a look at the budget already, you'll see that we committed this year to coming in at a 0% increase in our operational costs for our districts. So I'm really proud to say that not only are we coming in at a 0% for operational costs, we are also opening up a robotics program for the start of next school year. That'll open in September. And we also launched a new position. We hired a school to career coordinator who will help us make sure that all of our students who want to continue on to post-secondary, the workforce, or military receive the assistance they need to make that transition. So I mentioned earlier that we're co-owned and operated. So all of your districts come together. You each send us one. Our one is Art Levinowitz, who can't be with us here tonight. But each of our districts sends one board member, and that forms our joint operating committee. We have an articles of jointure, and that sort of shows us how we all play in the sandbox together, how things are funded, how we vote on things, how we come together as a group of organizations to co-own and operate our school. In 1965, well, before 1965, the building that we're in was a warehouse. It was purchased, turned into a technical school. In 1983, there were more extensive renovations, and then there was really nothing. Between 2014 and 2018, there were some minor renovations to some program areas. Next slide. And so now, in 2018, before I started, there was a development of a 10-year capital plan. And it's basically to say, hey, listen, we haven't gone through any kind of renovation since 1983. Our building's really, really old and dates prior to 1965. Like, what do we need to do to keep our building operational? It's $12.5 million spread over 10 years. Only 9.5 of that is attributed back to our districts because we have a capital reserve fund balance on our own budget. And what makes it different, it'll keep the building operational. It focuses on a new roof this summer, ADA compliance, updated HVAC and plumbing systems, electrical systems, increasing our technology capacity, and then looking at our safety and security. Obviously, schools are different than they were in 1983. So when you pay for our budget, you pay for it based on the enrollment, the number of kids that you send. But when you pay for capital projects, you pay into our capital reserve, it's actually based on your STEB values. That's your state tax equalization board, and it's the market value of your district. I'm going to introduce Mrs. Mary Martin, and she's our business manager, and she'll talk numbers.
Okay. So Kathleen gave you an overview. I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of the budget, the numbers that will be presented to you. The first thing I'd like to do on this slide is give you some background information, some terminology that I'll be mentioning. The first is the operating budget. So Dr. Plesnarski mentioned our operating budget came in at 0%. That is something we were committed to. That is the operating budget. It is for personnel, teachers, supplies, maintenance of our building, and just the recurring costs we operate as a school. This budget is based upon enrollment, okay? The other budget that we're going to be talking about is the capital budget. And this is new this year. It's a new assessment, and it is basically to upgrade our infrastructure or to maintain our infrastructure on a macro basis. It was based upon the engineering study of 10-year needs. And as Dr. Plesnarski mentioned, our last renovation was really 35 years ago. We have these budgets broken out into two names for one reason, and that is they're allocated differently. So our operating budget is based upon enrollment, and our capital budget, as Dr. Plesnarski said, is based upon the relative market values of the real estate in your district compared to all the other districts that we serve. Okay, so when I talk about operating budget, that's the normal budget. When I talk about capital budget, that's really for our infrastructure. So the other background information is, what did we try to accomplish with this budget? What were our goals? Okay, our major goals was to sustain our quality of education, to improve our career transition. We have budgeted for a school-to-career counselor. We've actually already hired that person, and we've included it in the budget, even though the operating budget is not increased. We're enhancing programs, robotics and automated technology. We made it a goal to address our infrastructure needs this budget cycle. So we positively said we have to start doing this. It was a purposeful goal for this budget. And then our last goal, since we knew we were going to have a capital assessment, was to keep the operating assessment at 0. Okay. All right, so this next slide is is what's called budget controls, and it's a lot of statistics, a lot of percentages. And what I want you to focus on is the last row of this chart. And what that row shows is how we've increased assessments to our sending districts over the years. And it goes back from 2012 to 2013. You can see we've actually had a decrease one year. This year we're keeping it at 0. We've had another 0 year. We're usually below the Act 1 index. I think in all but 2 years we were significantly below the Act 1 index. So we're really very budget conscious, and this year, again, we're keeping it at 0, knowing that we're putting a little bit of a burden on our sending schools for this capital assessment. Okay. So we've dealt a little bit with the statistics. Let's get into the numbers on the budget. For our 1920 budget, the year that we're in now, our revenue and expenditures is about 9,270. Okay, 9,270,000. The upcoming budget, our revenue and expenditures is actually slightly less than that, 9.138. Okay, and of that revenue that we expect in, 78% of it is funded by our sending schools. The rest of it is state grants, federal grants, just like you have. Some of your funding is taxpayers. A lot of it does come from federal and state grants. We have the same situation. So you're actually, as a group, as a collective group, you're funding 78% of the expenses of our school. So talking about the operating assessment, okay, this is simply the operating assessment. It's based upon enrollment, and what we do is we do a 3-year rolling average of your enrollment as compared to our other sending schools, Abington, Cheltenham, Hatboro, Horsham, all the other schools that send us students. You've averaged in the past 3 years about 33, 34 children per year, students per year. Okay, so in regards to our operating budget, we base it upon this statistic. The next slide is how that plays out for all the districts and for your district. Now, look at the last line of this chart. Our assessments to our sending schools in 1920 was $7,095,000. This year it's $7,095,000 also. We're keeping that flat. So when we say 0 increase, this is what we're referring to. Overall, there's no increase to our operating assessment this year. Now, on a school-by-school basis, there's winners and losers. Some actually have more of an assessment, and some assessments have declined. Overall, it's 0. Upper Dublin is one of those schools that actually has a decline in the operating budget portion this year. It's a decline of about $58,000. Okay, so even though our overall assessment to our sending schools has not increased on a school-by-school basis, there's some pluses, some minuses there. Okay. So our total assessment for Upper Dublin in our operating budget is $471,135. Okay, as compared to 1920 when it was $529,000. Okay, so what I just talked about was our operating budget. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about this new capital assessment. This new capital assessment is based upon the articles of jointure. We must allocate it based on the relative market values of all of the real estate of our sending schools. So our total capital assessment this year is $750,000. Okay, to all of our schools. Of that, Upper Dublin's share is $113,354. Okay. So now I'm going to pull it all together in the next chart, and this is what is your total assessment, operating and capital, for 2021. So it's the 471, the highlighted row there, 471, 135, plus the 113, 354 capital assessment for a total of 584, 489. That's going to be our budget to, our assessment to Upper Dublin, proposed budget for 2021. And overall, that's an increase of 55,224. Okay, next slide. So we're in the process now of our Joint Operating Committee has authorized us to present the budgets to all of our districts, and we're asking them at the January meeting to approve the budget as I explained. Okay, according to the articles, 2/3 of our participating districts must approve the budget, along with a majority vote of all directors. Okay, so we have a few schools in. So far, we have 3 schools out of 3 reporting as approving our budget, and all directors who were present at the meeting did vote for it. So we feel very positive that we're hopeful that we're going to adopt the budget as presented.
Any questions from the committee or other board members? I do have one.
Yes.
Do you anticipate, so let me step back. The capital assessment, has that happened in the past? And do you anticipate that continuing going forward, or is it a one-time thing for now? What's the history and the future plan?
Okay,
for that?
so
That's a great segue into the next page of the presentation.
You're welcome.
Thank you. This is not part of your PowerPoint presentation. Andy was kind enough to review our presentation and say, hey, Kathleen, they're probably going to ask what this is going to look like over the next 10 years. I saw a note pass. I don't know. So I'm going to let Mary just talk about the numbers, but your school's highlighted so you can see how the assessment would be each year.
Okay, so in the past, in the recent past, we have not had this assessment. We have no debt. We have not tried to raise any money over the recent probably 20 years for capital improvements. So this is a new situation, but it's been a long time coming. Our building is aging. So we had a study done by Dewey Engineers about a year ago, and they went through and they listed, they toured our building, interviewed our staff, and came up with a capital plan for 10 years. And the capital plan, we require a new roof, we require a new HVAC. These are infrastructure issues. The cost of this is about $12.5 over the next 10 years. Okay, so we currently have about $3 million. Most of that will be going towards a roof, which we're going to be having done this summer. That means we had to raise another $9.6 million for this plan. So this is a 10-year plan. $750,000 overall is the first year of the plan, and each year it goes up somewhat and then tapers off towards the end. So we do expect that this is going to be an ongoing assessment for the next 10 years.
Andy or Jen, that hasn't been in our forecasts for the last several, has it? We haven't known about this, or is it? Okay.
So, I just want to point out, if you think about it, over the next 10 years, you'll invest $1.4 million into your technical school, which is probably a drop in the bucket compared to what you invest in your own facilities. So I think it's certainly well worth it. And the commitment we're making to you is we're going to make sure that we're good stewards of that capital assessment. Where we can save money, we're going to save money. when we can do more to enhance programming. Like, for example, we had $3 million that was in our capital reserve already budgeted for a roof. The original engineers spec'd out a 3-ply roof. We realized that by putting on an EPDM roof, which is the same roof you guys just put on your renovations, that we could save enough money, about $900,000, to actually renovate for our robotics program. So we're going to make sure that we can funnel this money and do what we need to do to maintain the building, but also to keep an eye on programming and what's best for kids and how we're going to enhance their experience at our school.
So the alternative to this plan was doing a bond issue, basically. And we call this the pay-as-you-go method. So we're going to pay for these improvements each year. We're going to revisit it each year. If something happens to the economy, we may reassess the situation. So we think that this plan is flexible if there are any issues each year.
Teacher?
So this capital improvement is independent of the number of students we send. So if we send 2 students or 100 students, that is a fixed amount. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's based upon the relative market value of the real estate, and Upper Dublin is one of the higher values, the higher assessed real estate values in our districts.
And then my other question is a little different. You are not increasing this year, yet you're introducing 2 additional programs. Are you dropping programs? How are you achieving this 0%?
Well,
Do you mind if I answer that? I'm going to technically say we're only I know we're going to fight over it, who gets to answer. We're technically really opening up 1 program. We implemented a position that's a school-to-career coordinator, and that person helps connect students into apprenticeships, into post-secondary, into employment. So that's just a position, a cost. The robotics program was also a position, but we have strategically used grant funding to do that. So just for example, last year, Governor Wolf increased the budget by $10 million. That had a significant impact on us. It doubles our supplemental equipment grant, and it also maintains the competitive equipment grant. So $145,000, and we were awarded the competitive equipment grant, so we're really excited. That was $50,000 with matching funds. So we were able to get like $150,000 worth of equipment just by doing that. Then adding on, changing the roof structure from a 3-ply to an EPDM, which is more of an industry standard now anyway, saved us enough money that we could do that small renovation within our building to actually open up the robotics program. And then also in our older budgets, the director before me had enough foresight to say, we have been increasing enrollment over the years. We may need to add additional staff. We might want to open up a program. So there has been 3 positions within our budget that have been budgeted over the years and not filled. And now we're making sure that we're doing it so we can better serve kids.
And thank you. And then one last question: this roof project, is that going to be totally outsourced, or are students going to be part of that? Because the last time that I toured the school, there was some significant construction going on. I mean, the students were demonstrating their construction skills, and I was curious if you incorporated this project into the curriculum.
Well, we do have amazing kids with amazing skills. We don't actually have a roofing program, and in this case, because it's a $3 million project, we have to use prevailing wage bid out jobs. We can't actually use student work. There was, we hire students every year. We hire student interns that work within our maintenance department that save our school a lot of money by, updating our electrical systems and other things within our building, and we're still being mindful of that.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, so if I understood correctly, this budget amount will be carried or needs to be on our January legislative meeting agenda to vote. So if now would be the time if there's questions about that to discuss it And just as a reminder, we have to vote on this on Monday.
Mr. Lackman, what's your interpretation of these numbers moving forward for the next 10 years in terms of, I mean, is this a realistic progression with what you see in construction costs in general? I know I put you on the spot here, but
So I have to be honest, I mean, I'm really just sort of seeing this information for the first time today, so I don't know that I'm honestly in a position to answer that. I'd be happy to, you know, to discuss this further with the folks from Eastern and get their feedback, but I don't know that I can answer that tonight.
When we've met as a superintendent group, the sending superintendents meet monthly with Dr. Plesnarski and her team. One of the benefits to the pay-as-you-go philosophy versus floating a bond and fixing in costs is if there is a downturn in the economy, if there's some significant hardship with the district, that we have much more flexibility. I don't think anyone knows much more beyond 2 or 3 years, especially with the presidential election coming up and not knowing what that will do either positively or negatively to the economy. But I think what gives everybody collectively among the 8 school districts, especially the superintendents, the pay-as-you-go philosophy was much more palatable than fixing in costs by floating a bond.
Yeah, so you're voting each year on the current year assessment. You're not voting for all of the 10 years right now.
And we would be more than willing to share what the capital plan is. And if you look at it, you'll see that we're putting high need areas first during the first set of funding, like, you know, a roof, safety and security, ADA accessibility, and then moving on to things that are important but aren't as urgent.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Do you recruit sponsors, like for, I know you're saying about prevailing wages, but however, on materials like lumber, and you're saying you're replacing a new roof, do you recruit sponsors for contributing materials?
Well, in my 10 months, I have not done a lot of that. I have worked with our Association of Career and Technical Education to make us EITC. Now that it's being recorded, I can't remember the acronym. So we are EITC eligible. We have reached out to some of our stakeholders who have a connection with corporate gifting, who are making a commitment to help us through the next EITC funding cycle so that we can do that. I've just applied for a $200,000 PA manufacturing training to career grant that would help cover some of the costs for the robotics and the stuff that we're doing. So we're doing what we can. We always do what we can to try to bring in other avenues of money. If you know someone who would like to do some corporate gifting, Stanley, call me.
All right, anyone else? All right, I'll just say what I think needs to be said, that it's a little frustrating to me that 3 days before we have to vote on it, we're hearing about a change in funding formula that results in a 10% increase. It is not a big dollar amount in the size of our budget, and I don't anticipate that being a big hurdle, but I would have thought there'd be a little more discussion and a little more opportunity to investigate beforehand, but it is what it is at this point. And so, Stan, Mike, will move that forward to the legislative meeting next week. All right, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have a presentation on the preliminary budget. Mr. Leckman. Oh, all right, Dr. Yanni.
folks will remember that last year we did a stakeholder survey. And when we did that stakeholder survey, we surveyed on a number of topics, budget and finance being one. And of the 699 responses that we got, there was an overwhelming response that community stakeholders didn't necessarily understand the budget in the context of what we're trying to do as a district. So tonight, we're going to start the budget presentation by talking about budgetary priorities. Our annual budget is a guide, and it should always reflect the priorities that we have as a district. So if something is a priority, more funds would be allocated to it. And if something is not necessarily a priority, we have to ask ourselves in a needs-based budget if we're actually going to include that in our annual budget. So Ms. Baldessano, if you could go to the second slide. So the priorities are to construct, approve, and implement an educationally and fiscally sound budget. So not only do we have to construct a good budget and have the board approve that, but next year when we implement it, we have to live within the means of that budget. We need to align our budget priorities to what we've laid out in our strategic action plans. If you remember, our strategic action plans are teaching and learning, technology and innovation, budget and finance, facilities and operations, human resources and labor relations, and engagement. And we also have to ensure transparency to increase communication and foster trust. And so as we go through the budget tonight, it's going to be presented in a little bit of a different way than it has been before, and I think the conversations that we'll have around some of the areas of the budget will allow everyone to understand them a little bit better. So first and foremost, we have to ensure a quality K-12 education, and when we did our strategic action plans, we put out a goal that 100% of our students would read on or above grade level by the end of grade 3. We also used the 2 state benchmarks that they use for the Future Ready Pennsylvania Index, that all kids would reach at least a level of proficiency in mathematics by the end of grade 7 and proficiency in writing by 8th grade. We need to continue to incorporate technology that is meaningful, and so it's not always about new or different technology, it's how we're actually using that technology with kids. We're going to be, and we have already started this, employing a needs-based budget philosophy and remain inside the Act 1 index. And the reason we're doing a needs-based budget is because it requires all budget holders to justify what they're putting in their budgets. So far we've done initial looks at all the buildings and all the departments. We're going back now and doing that a second time. Our next round of that with our budget controller, so our principals and directors, will be looking at staffing inside each of their buildings. So, for example, at the high school staffing is driven by tallies. It's driven by course selection. At the elementary level and middle school level, it's driven more by class size. So we'll be looking at making sure that we are right-sizing our district and making sure that we have the correct supports in place for kids to be successful. We need to attract, hire, and retain a highly qualified staff that's reflective of our student community. Our new Human Resources Director, Ashley Kitten, is working with a cohort of other Human Resource Directors around the county to increase diversity on our staff. So she'll be coming to a future Education Committee meeting to talk specifically about those efforts. We need to be able to fund capital projects, so we have the new Sandy Run being built. We have 3 elementary schools that need attention, Jarretttown being the one that needs the most and most immediate attention. And then we have to engage the community in not only the budget process, but why things are the way they are in the budget. And the only way we're going to do that is if we talk in plain language about the priorities of the budget and why things are the way they are inside the budget. And I'll turn the rest over to Mr. Luckman.
Thank you, Dr. Yanni. So over the last couple of Finance Committee meetings, we've done a lot of work talking about the budget, presenting preliminary information, talking about some trends, introducing you to some new schedules that I've rolled out. So what tonight is a little more formal of a presentation, just to give you information on some more details, some charts, so you can see a lower level into the budget and some of the things that are driving the challenges as we look at our budget deficit. So these are some of the things I'm going to cover tonight, and I'm going to start with budgetary basics. So just backing up a little bit, I know we have some new folks on the board, and just starting with budget basics and giving you an understanding of where we start when we look at a budget from a district level. So very first off, Act 1 of 2006, we've talked about this a little bit, really drives the budget process for school districts. So it establishes a set index by which property taxes cannot be raised beyond. And we've talked about this in that 2021, the index is set at 2.6%, and actually at the last meeting, we passed a resolution to stay within that. Districts can apply for exceptions to go beyond the index for increase in PSERS, the retirement system, and special education. Fund balance must be required thresholds, and we've also talked about at a finance committee meeting, our fund balance policy says that our unassigned fund balance must stay between, or the guideline is to stay between 5 and 8% of expenditures. And the budget approval can take one of two paths, which we've already gone down the Act 1 resolution, or adopt a resolution to pass a proposed preliminary budget. So fund balance is something that we talk about often, so I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about what fund balance actually is. So fund balance is simply our savings account. So if you equate it to your personal finances, fund balance is our savings account. It's our assets minus our liabilities. And when we look at our budget and how we create it, I like to make sure that fund balance really should be used for one-time type expenditures. As soon as you get into a process of using it on recurring expenditures, that's when you get into financial challenges. So I equate it to, if you pay your mortgage out of your savings account every single month, eventually you're going to run out of money. So it should be used more strategically, pre-planned one-time expenditures. Examples: assessment appeals, rate stabilization, capital items that are one-time, not salaries and benefits. It's also essential for cash flow purposes. So if you think at the beginning of July, tax bills go out at the beginning of July, but really that revenue doesn't start coming in until August is when beginning to middle of August is when most of that comes in. So for a month to a month and a half, we have to be able to pay bills, pay salaries. So it's essential to have some funds for cash flow purposes. And then, we'll talk in another agenda item later tonight. For Moody's credit rating, we're in the process of borrowing to build Sandy Run Middle School. When we get our rating from the credit agencies, which determines really interest rates for our borrowing, they look very favorably on having money in the bank, fund balance, budgets without large deficits. So a little bit on property tax lingo now. So property taxes are, if you didn't already know, our main revenue source in the district. It accounts for a large percentage, almost 78% of our total revenues for the districts. So property tax rate or millage rate is the rate that we'll set when we approve a final budget, and that really represents the amount per every $1,000 of a property's assessed value. And we talked about assessed value versus market value. I think the last meeting, Mr. Rovsky asked a question about this, so I won't spend too much time, but assessed value is the dollar value assigned to a property to measure or calculate taxes, and market value is if you were going to sell your house, that is what it would actually sell for. So in Montgomery County, it's about a 2-to-1, so if you take your assessed value and multiply it by 2, that's about the market value of your property. So again, market value and assessed value are not the same thing. And then to calculate property taxes, assessed value divided by 1,000 times the millage rate gives you your taxes. So the next slide actually shows a calculation so you can see real examples of that. So the median property assessed value in Upper Dublin, this is our current median assessed value, is about almost $197,000. So again, assessed value for taxes, market value, that means the average market value, the median market value would be around $400,000 estimated. So if you divide that by 1,000 times our current year 1920 millage rate, you get a total property tax bill of $6,777. The second row is, we talked about as part of our preliminary budget. We have a placeholder in our preliminary budget, while we haven't passed the tax rate yet, of 2.6% increase. So you can see what that would look like to the median property in the district. And that would be a total property tax bill of $6,953, or an annual increase of about $176. So that's just how the calculation works to get to your property tax bill. So our budget process that we go through, we've talked about this quite a bit. We're right in the middle here. So December, we just passed the resolution to stay within the index. Really what we're doing right now, and Dr. Yanni mentioned this, is we're really spending time going through all the individual building and department budgets to review their preliminary budgets that were submitted, look for expense savings opportunities, and then really to start some staffing discussions with building and departments as well. By May timeframe, we'll finalize the staffing, as best as we can. Enrollment's a constantly moving target, but we'll have a good sense of where we're at by May. And May and June, we'll present a proposed final budget. And then in June, the board will be required to approve a final budget. So budget highlights, this is where this was one of the first pieces of information that I showed when we started talking about budget. This is at the highest level, revenues and expenses. And what we look like. So in 1920, you can see we have budgeted revenues of a little over 101 million, budgeted expenses of over 103 million, and the deficit, or the budgeted deficit, is 1.8 million. We also have a planned transfer to the Capital Reserve Fund, a budgeted planned transfer of 1.458 million. So that leaves us with an ending unassigned fund balance of about 2.9 million. And then you can see how that rolls forward into 2021. We have a $2.8 million gap between revenues and expenses, which leaves us with essentially nothing at the end of the year in our unassigned fund balance. Now again, this is budget. This is preliminary budget. We haven't done any work on, savings opportunities. So I would call this worst case scenario right now. And the other piece I want to mention here is a legal budget must be balanced. So when you talk about budget lingo, or things you need to know. So balanced budget means we have enough resources to basically end the year with a positive fund balance, okay? When I talk about a structurally balanced budget, that really means expenses and revenues are balanced. So you have exactly as much revenue as you have expenses budgeted in a structurally balanced budget. I would say our balance has a structural deficit, because it's a deficit that exists and is growing out into the future. It's not one-time expenses that are causing the deficit to exist. We're just in a position where we have expenses that are growing faster than revenues, and that's the problem that we're working on bringing a solution to. So preliminary budget assumptions. So what were some of the assumptions that were built into our preliminary budget? So property tax, we have a 2.6% increase placeholder. Again, we did not approve a tax rate for next year yet. It's preliminary. Earned income tax, we have a 1% increase in there. Earned income tax trends, it's been trending up over the past years, so we feel very comfortable with a 1% increase. State revenues are flat year to year. It's really too early for us to start to project what the state budget will look like. Governor Wolf will give his state budget presentation in the beginning of February, so we'll start to get an idea of how the state's going to fund or present funding education next year. PSERS and FICA, we do get a reimbursement back from the state for those costs, so that increases as salaries increase, and we'll look a little closer at PSERS. Federal revenues are no change, but that's a really small part of our overall budget. On the expenditure side, staffing, our total staff numbers, right now we've taken the position in preliminary of status quo, but we'll be doing a lot more work around that over the next 3 to 4 months. Increases in there are based on current employment contracts. Benefits, we participate with the Bucks and Montgomery County Healthcare Consortium, and our first look was an 8% increase, which is what's built into the budget right now. Every 1% that changes is worth about $75,000. So, typically at this point, that's a worst case number because there's a lot of trend in there, and trend typically comes with a higher rate. So as more months of actuals come in, that it tends to trend down from the first look. So that's what that would look like. and the PSERS employer rate is certified. And we'll talk more about that. All others are built on building and department budget owners, their first round of a preliminary budget. Debt service is based on PFM schedules. Our budgetary reserve is $250,000, and the transfer to capital reserve is zero, just because our budget can't withstand that at the current point in time. So chart on revenues here. So if you look at revenues, I don't think it's any surprise we talked about this. Property taxes are the largest revenue source at over $70 million. And you can see everything else is really small compared to that. State revenue is around $20 million, and federal doesn't even register on here. So we receive very little as far as federal dollars. And again, I want to make sure 2.6% is what's built into that property tax. So that's actually next year's property tax estimate. So property taxes are based on our overall assessed value across the district, and I think it's just important to point out the trend that we've seen of property assessed values over time. So what you can see here is back in July of 2013 to current, which is out, where we're at right now. There's only been about a 0.7% increase over that time. So assessed values have stayed relatively flat. Even though we've seen some new developments come into play, we've also had many assessment appeals by commercial properties. So every time we get a little bit of additional assessed value, it seems to be pulling back from commercial assessments. And everyone here I think is aware of the prudential tax credit, but that big drop off from July 2018 to July 2019 is our largest taxpayer, won a significant assessment appeal, which cost us $1.2 million this year. It'll have an $800,000 impact in the 2021 budget, and then forever it'll be $670,000 of lost revenue. Also, about 80% of our total assessed value is residential, 20% is commercial industrial, and also note that current assessment appeals, there's 10 significant assessment appeals out there, and the worst case scenario right now, if everything went, totally against us, would be about $23 million in lost assessed value, or about $1.9 million in annual revenue. So we have to keep our eye on that. The next slide really looks at all the new developments, and I pulled this information. This information is directly from the Upper Dublin Township budget presentation that they gave in November of 2019. It looks at all the properties that are out there and what the township is estimating right now as far as new assessed values. So if you look at this is certainly a positive that's out there for us. You have about $6.1 million in potential new revenue from these new developments. But there's a significant unknown in that, assessed value is, it's an estimate at this point. Could be higher, it could be lower. If the economy starts to, take a turn for the worse, those assessed values could come down. Timing is a question mark. We really don't know when the full value of all these properties are going to come online. So I take the position that we really don't want to be building any of this into our long-term plan until it's real. It certainly helps our long-term trajectory of revenue, but until it's real, we can't depend on it. So we need to make sure we're taking actions independent of this new revenue until it materializes. On the expenditure side, as most school districts, we are heavily dependent on staff. So salary and benefits, personnel costs are 76% of our total costs. Debt service is 11%, so 80% of our total budget is salaries and benefits and debt service. The all other number is about 13.5 million. But I'd like to make sure everyone understands that it's not like we can go there and say, let's cut $3 million out of that all other, and that's our solution. Not all of that is discretionary. There's large chunks that are made up. We heard from Eastern tonight, so VOTEC tuitions, charter school tuitions, special education tuitions, utilities, subs, building vehicle repairs. All these things are things that we can manage, but they're not all truly discretionary. So those are the areas where we're really taking a hard look at right now and making sure we're controlling them as well as we possibly can. So major budget pressures, this was one of the discussions I believe we had in November, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time here other than to say, you know, the major budget areas as we start to project out a couple of years. If you look at the increases in wages, benefits, retirement, debt service, that increase is far exceeding the increases in our primary revenue source, which is property taxes. So that's really what we're working on right now is how do we make up the difference there? And really the difference is going to come through the work we're going to do on the expense side, and that's how we need to make up that difference. But this is I think a key slide to look at major expense increases as it compares to property tax increases. PSERS is our state retirement system that all employers are required to participate in, so we don't have a choice. We are part of PSERS whether we like it or not. And what this slide shows you is the employer contribution rate over the past, back to 10, 11, out to 27, 28. And what you see here is that in 10, 11, the employer rate was 5.64%. And next year, it's certified at 34.51%. And what that means is, for every dollar of salary, we pay almost 35 cents into the PSERS system. So that ends up being a huge number for our district and districts across the state. And that line just continues to trickle, trend up out into 27, 28. And doesn't come down for about 20 years, at least on current projections. So that number is kind of stuck with us. And it's also important to note that those increases have been during the large increases in the market, and as the economy's roared and the stock market has roared, we've still had to have these huge increases to keep up, and their out-year trends are based on 7.5% market returns. So, we've had a 10, 11-year, bull market that can't continue forever. So, if they have years that are negative returns, we're going to see that impacted in the employer rate. So employer costs, just so you understand the magnitude here, the blue line on the top is the checks that we actually write to PSERS. So, quarterly we pay PSERS, and in 2021 we're going to pay almost $18 million into PSERS. The orange line is the net cost, so the state actually gives us 50% reimbursement for PSERS. So in 2021, again, we'll have about $18 million in expense. We'll get about a little over $8 million, $9 million back in revenue. So it's a net cost of about $9 million. And you can see just in 14, 15, it was only about $4 million was our net expense. Now we're almost at $9 million and rising. And I think this next slide gets to a question that, or a comment that Dr. Levinowitz made a few meetings ago. So what this really looks at is how our costs for PSERS have gone up compared to the increases in total state revenue that we receive on an annual basis. So you can see the blue bars are our incremental payments or expenses to PSERS each year. The orange bars are the total increase in state funds. So over these 5 years that you see here, you can see that PSERS expenses increases have been about $8.8 million, and total state revenue increases have only been about $5.1 million. So that's a total net deficit of $3.7 million that needed to be made up by local taxpayers as far as PSERS. So while it is true we are getting more money from the state every year, it is not even covering the increases in the retirement system costs for us. This is just, as we looked at last month, we looked at a heavy numbers schedule, and what this chart looks at is just the trends of revenues and expenses that chart showed us. So, it's no surprise from everything we've talked about. The blue line are our expenditures, the orange line are our revenues, and what we need to do is bring the orange line and blue line back in line with each other. As we move out further into the future, those two lines continue to grow away from each other. The gap continues to grow, and that's what we need to fix. And I know those lines don't look too far apart, But when you look at the scale there, we're talking $5, $7, $10 million that they're really different as you move out towards the out years. Fund balance projections. So this is just as as expenses move away from revenues, fund balance, our savings account is going to quickly move towards zero. So again, I want to make sure to be clear. We're talking worst case scenario, but this is something real that it's real trends that we need to work out. The lines there are 2021, and I want to be clear. While those lines trend below zero, that's only for illustrative purposes only. Like I said a couple slides before, a legal budget has to be balanced. So we can't legally pass a budget that goes below zero. So illustrative only. Major budget unknowns, so we're preliminary at this point. When we presented our preliminary budget, there's still lots that are unknown. So that's why I call this worst case scenario. Tax increase, the preliminary budget has a 2.6% placeholder. A large risk, and while I don't think it's for next year, if you're paying attention to what's going on at the state level, and it's been discussed for years and years, but there are some, there's 4 different options on the table, 4 or 5 different options on the table. So it seems to be becoming more real every time they talk about it, is property tax elimination or some change in property tax funding and how school districts are funded by their local communities. So that's a risk as we look further out into our budget. Assessment appeals are real risks and unknowns. New developments are unknown. Amount and timing, state and federal revenues, we have no idea what's going to happen there. On the expenses side, staffing, the preliminary budget's based on status quo, but we have a lot of work to do around that yet. We already talked about medical and prescription and what that looks like. We won't know that for sure until April is when the final rates are set, and there's lots of tuition items. Charter schools specifically, I will tell you, we just were notified of another a charter school student that's in special education. Every time one of those moves into our district or transfers out of the district to charter school, it costs us $40,000. So that's a real number. So you get a couple of those, and that has a major impact on our budget. So what are the next steps? We've talked a lot about this already, but really the legwork of the budget, while we do a lot in the preliminary work, now really starts the legwork of digging in, identifying savings opportunities, operational efficiencies, budget accuracy to make sure, on our salary budget where we're constantly coming in under budget, looking at every role that's in the budget, are there roles that aren't filled that we can pull out? So a lot of work needs to be done in all of those areas. And I think ultimately the goal is to move towards a structurally balanced budget. Revenues equal expenses. Will we get there by next year? It's possible, but probably not. That's the ultimate goal, though, as we look out 2-3 years, is to truly get to a structurally balanced budget. May and June are the key dates. So May is when we'll look at a proposed final budget, and certainly we'll have more discussions between now and then. But as far as major steps, May is the proposed final budget, and June would be when we ask the board to take action on a final budget. So I will stop there and ask if you have any questions for me about any of that information.
Questions from the committee or other? Go ahead, Stan.
I know the retirement incentive for teachers is not in this year. Is that correct?
There is a $2,500 payable to a 403B sort of retirement bonus / acknowledgement. So retirements are due to us by March 1st. Last year we had a number. I don't know the number off the top of my head. I'll get that for you. Yeah, I'll get that. I'll make sure we get that number. And it's still too early to tell. Typically, with March 1st being the deadline, it will be that last week up to the deadline before we receive the majority of those.
To clarify, that retirement incentive is to give us the notice early. If they can still retire later than that, but they don't get the incentive if they don't give us the notice.
Exactly, and that really did two things. So it spread some goodwill with our teachers, but it also allowed us to get out into the market earlier. than the district had before. So we had all of our professional staff hiring done and approved at the June legislative meeting.
Other comments or questions? Jeff?
First of all, I'd like to thank the administration for this presentation. I thought it was really informative, chock full of information. Andy, one question. We've talked a lot about property tax increase, Act 1, et cetera. You referenced EIT increase, like a 1% increase then on the revenue side. Can you explain a little bit how that process works? Are there parameters, limits on the EIT side?
Just to be clear, you mean, do we have the opportunity to raise the percentage on EIT? I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to.
I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, so this should be verified. But I believe we have a limit of 1%, and most school districts do implement 1%, but not all do. The increase that I think that Andy's showing here is not in the percentage. It's not something we're controlling. It's the base amount. It's like the equivalent of the assessed value going up. That's the total income made by residents.
That's correct. Yeah, as real wages increase, we've tended to see an increase in the amount of EIT that we collect. So local taxes, 1% of total wages. Yeah, that's a good question.
From what I understand, only the residents who pay a earned income tax, 1%, half of that percent goes to the township, and 1/2 goes to the district. However, if you live in New Jersey and you pay the earned income tax, the full 1% goes to the township. And if you live in Upper Dublin and you work in the city, because of the Sterling Act, they are required to pay the city wage tax, and we get 0. Even though they live in our district and go to our schools or whatever, if they have kids, they still don't pay their. We miss out on that earned income tax, which could be millions of dollars.
We do. There is a Sterling tax calculation that is done, and we do receive some of that money through that calculation from folks that work in Philadelphia. Not all of it. Probably not all that we're due, but we do. There is a calculation that we submit for every year. It's the Sterling tax wage certification, I think it is, and we do get an EIT payment for that. It comes in at as earned income tax.
Anyone else? Titia.
I just want to check to make sure that the PSERS is the same, the percentage is the same for every single school district, right? That's not specific to Upper Dublin.
That's correct. The employer rate that's paid in is the same for every employer.
And then the expected rate of return. That is a moving, I mean, that's really a sort of a crystal ball kind of number, isn't it?
So there's folks that are much smarter than me. They're called actuaries, and they do all of this work. So, the actuaries that PSERS is required to hire to do this work, they do all of those calculations. They base rate of return, off, lots of work that they do. So that 7.5% is not a number that PSERS just pulled out of the air. That's from all the actuarial work that's done around this.
Anyone else? Okay, I have two quick questions. One is on the slide showing the anticipated revenue from new developments. I just want to clarify to be sure that while most of this data came from the township budget presentation, the estimated real tax when built out, that's our number, not their number, right?
That's correct. Yeah, thank you for clarifying. So it's all the columns that are denoted with a 1 there. I kind of made a sub-bullet there. Those are all from the township presentation. The last 2 columns are based on our millage rate and what we would expect to collect. That's correct.
Thanks. And out of curiosity, so the first look we got from the consortium, what were the numbers for medical and RX, the separate numbers? Do you know, from medical and RX?
I have those numbers not off the top of my head.
I don't need
The
it now, but-
average is 8%, so, you know, when you
Yeah.
look across both of those, 8% is the total increase. I can certainly get the breakdown.
Yeah, I'd be curious. All right. Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else? All right, thank you for that. Oh, yes. Go ahead, Jen.
On the new development, that $6 million, are there any costs associated to the schools? I mean, I assume there are. Is that factored in? What?
The costs that would come back to us would be if we needed to hire additional staff. One thing that I want to be clear about, not only for the folks here in the room, but that may be watching or watch at a later time, there's been some information that none of our buildings have room at the elementary level. That's not true. The new Sandy Run will also have room, and this building has room. So the cost would be if we needed to add staff. Typically, though, when a new development comes in, you typically get kids across the grade span, so it would have a negligible effect, we believe.
Okay, so thank you for that presentation. Let's move on to the reports and recommendations, starting with the Sandy Run Middle School update. Is that Bob?
Yes. This month's report, Dewey has submitted their report to us. That is part of the notes for everyone to take a look at. But some of the major milestones that we've hit over the past month, first was the stormwater line was a major operation. I'd like to thank the cooperation of everyone, the students, the parents, the bus drivers. We had a lot of detours through our driveway, students rerouting of the walkers during this process. But over winter break, the stormwater line was completed. That was a major operation. If you drive past the site now, you'll see the large retaining wall has been poured. That is the wall for the lowest level of the classroom wing that's built into the hillside. So that actually gets backfilled on the backside of the wall. Now it'll be the backside of that wall will be the ground level.
Can I speak to that just
Yes.
for a second? You know, when you look at the diagrams and the architect's rendering of the building, the first floor classrooms tend to look like they're sunken into the ground. Having been down there on the site, standing next to it, they are not subterranean classrooms. I know that was a concern, and that there wouldn't be a lot of natural light, but that's false. So I'm very comfortable with the first floor classrooms.
And there are no classrooms along with that retaining wall is. That's hallway wall. It's actually underneath the library. So there are no rooms along that wall that would not have windows. You can also start to see the classroom walls are starting to go up. They're cinder block walls. The masons have been working as temperatures allow. The closest portion to the driveway wing, all the classroom walls are set so you can actually see the locations of the walls. The plumbers have been in, the electricians have been in, the underground conduits and pipes are in for that wing. It's really starting to take shape. Another major milestone was the first detention basin was installed. That's going underneath the multi-purpose field that's outside the cafeteria at the Limekiln Pike and Twining Road intersection of the school. So that has been completed. And with the completion of the stormwater line, detention basin, we asked Dewey to take a look at the escrow that we have with the township, and they're coming back with a report. We'll be able to go to the township and ask for some of our escrow money back because the escrow being held was for major land improvements such as the stormwater lines and basins.
All right, any comments or questions? I will say I was on site last week, I think it was, with Dr. Yanni, and it's really exciting to at this point, to me, to stand there and actually see the building starting to grow up out of the ground. It's a big milestone. All right, yes, Titia.
If the community wants to see some of this, is that possible? Either virtually or in person?
So we shared the flyover video. So that was shared on social media and on our website. I've asked for that to be done every month so that we can see the progress. community actually coming on site, that won't happen until almost the very end of the project, but we're pretty tech savvy here, so I imagine we're going to be doing some virtual walkthroughs and other things so that the community can see firsthand what's going on. Once more of the, or once the structural steel starts, we're also going to put up a camera so that folks can watch, and we'll have a feed to our website so that you can watch the construction as it unfolds.
Anyone else? Okay, so also in this item is our regular monthly budget update for the project. If anyone does have specific questions about that, be sure to ask Andy. Or does anyone have questions now? Okay. Moving on, so bids for the Fort Washington roof repairs, Bob.
Yes, yesterday we opened bids for repairs to the Fort Washington Elementary School roof. We were pleased. We had 6 bidders. 4 bidders were from our region we expected to see. We actually had 2 out-of-state bidders come in. We did not expect to see them, but they were welcome to submit bids. It's interesting to note, we had a good cluster of the low bids, and it was the 4 regional companies. We were very close together. The 2 highest bids that were well above the others were from our out-of-region bidders. Munn Roofing from Hatfield came in the lowest cost at $152,400 for the roof repairs. This is something we're looking to jump on right away because we are slightly vulnerable to any wind damage until we have these repairs made. There are allowances built into the job we may or may not use, so we could have a lower cost at the end of the job depending if we need to use all the allowances that were based onto this project. We did review the bids with our architect. I was very pleased. We had conversations with Munn Roofing. They fully understand the scope of the project, and we looked at their references. Their references were quite impressive, and actually a lot of their recent work were middle schools that we had toured for construction, such as Northampton, Nichmond, so schools that we had visited. Munn had the roofing project for those construction jobs.
And Bob, can you remind us what the pre-bid estimate for this project was?
We never had a good estimate. Architect, it's all labor. They weren't sure what to expect. It really didn't take a good stab. We were hoping in the 100,000 range. We came in a little higher, 150. But again, we really just were taking a shot in the dark at what the repairs are going to be, because it really was a rush process to get this in to prevent any further damage. There wasn't. Michael went through the design very quickly. We really didn't have time to bring somebody in and evaluate how many hours labor.
All right, comments or questions? Stan?
Are we going to get any allowances or monies from the warranty from this roof that failed?
Well, Carlisle Roofing, the manufacturer of the membrane, has been working with us. They're in regular contact with Michael Johnston, the architect for the project. They have confirmed that they will continue honoring the warranty that's on the current roof. They're not going to offer any extensions, but they've also given a verbal commitment to helping with material on this job. They have not put anything in writing to us yet. They want to see the bids coming in and who the winning bidder was before they would make any commitments. Material is not a significant portion of this bid. It's almost all labor. You're really talking about roof fasteners, maybe a few $1,000s worth of roof fasteners into the job, and then some additional membrane that would be needed, 12-inch wide strip that would go over to seal over where the new roofing fasteners would be. So we're not talking significant cost, but Carlisle has verbally said they will help with that. We just don't know what that number will be yet.
And just to add a reminder that the failure was not a failure of the current roof. The failure was a failure of the roof that's underneath the current roof. Right?
Yes, and one of the interesting.
I thought it was the adhesive.
It was the adhesion between the original roof, which was put in 1995, and the insulation that was installed as part of that roofing system. And through the design process, Michael really did take a look at the roof and where the fails. And it was interesting to note any areas around the building where there are trees that block the wind from hitting the building. there were no failures. So we believe this is just deterioration of the glue, in effect with the uplift factors from windstorms that just led to this condition.
Okay, so you're saying that this roof was installed in 1995?
The original roof, as best we can tell, was installed in 1995, and what we purchased in 2012 was a rehabilitated roof. It was really a roofing update where they applied a new fleece membrane on top of the old membrane that was there. At the time, as far as we could tell, we looked through with the consultant's notes, the bid specifications. At the time this project was completed, there were no signs that there was going to be any failures of the existing roof.
Okay, so the second roof was, you said 2012?
Yes.
All right, 2012. 8 years. It failed in 8 years. The glue, or because
The
of
original
the
roof.
wind?
Yeah, the glue was from 1995.
Okay.
The glue, our current membrane is perfectly adhered to the existing membrane that was on the original membrane. So the work that was done in 2012 has not failed whatsoever. It's the work that was done in 1995 that is starting to fail.
This was the only option that they put out there, or was there, did we look at other options? I mean,
We
could we put
discussed,
stone, gravel on top
there
of
was
it?
talk about stone, gravel, but then we're going to be getting into structural evaluations. The stone also wouldn't really help us with the uplift. As part of this new design is we will be meeting the latest standards for wind uplift that are required. So storms, research has shown now the wind uplift with increase in storms, strength of the storms, the codes have followed what they're seeing in real life. So there are new requirements. So with what we're doing now, we will meet the new requirements. And this was the best option. Carlisle also recommends this option, and they're very happy working with us, so they will be maintaining the warranty.
This seems like a lot of money for, I mean, this roof here, you're saying is 8 years old, and did they say how long this new patchwork will last?
This new patchwork will carry us through the remaining warranty. There's another 7-8 years left on the warranty, and we'll get well beyond that.
Okay, do you know how much the 2012 cost for the roof repair or replacement was?
I don't have that information in front of me. We would be able to find that.
For the next meeting?
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? Titia?
What is the timeline for this project in terms of when is this actually happening and how, if at all, will it impact what's going on inside the building?
It will not impact school. We will be able to work during the school day. They maybe a little bump once in a while they would hear, but we could also work different sections of the building as well. So if there's any testing going on, we can move people around. We are looking to have this project done and completed starting in March and finishing in April. This is something we really want to push through before we start to see some heavy thunderstorms.
Yeah, just one more question. Could you send a memo or information about the process that this, work is going to be
Yes.
done? Like, I know you were saying they were going to be putting anchors, and then on top of the anchors, you would have to patch it.
Yes, we could do a memo along with the bid specs. The drawings on the bid specs really will explain where the new fastening system will be going.
Thank you.
Bob, 2 quick questions.
Yes.
Just so I understand, the unit price that's on the layout, there's an ad unit price for the flashing and another one for the detail. That's within the price, not a separate item, correct?
That is correct. That is built within the price, and it is returned to us. Any of those amounts that we do not need for unit pricing will be returned to us.
Great. Second question, I noticed in the architect's letter, they referenced an investigation into a claim, I guess, that MUN has out there, and that the liability carrier for MUN's responding. Do we know, is that an accident claim as opposed to a performance claim, since there's insurance involved? If we
No,
know?
this was a civil claim on another job that was involving all the contractors who were on the job.
Nothing to do with Upper Dublin.
No, nothing to do with Upper Dublin. I don't have the details, the litigation details on the claim, but we were advised it is a civil claim based on another job where all the contractors, the general contractors, were all involved in this lawsuit, and they are being represented by their insurance company. The insurance company will be handling any claims against them, so it will not affect their ability to perform work.
Okay, do they have to get a bond for this?
Yes.
Okay, we want to make sure the bonding insurance company is based in Pennsylvania. Because I know at the township, they had a bonding company based in New York. Of course, the company went bankrupt and we couldn't get our money. So we want to make sure, because if the company was if the building was in New York, you would get first dibs on the money. And by the time it got to any company outside of New York, there was no money left. So we lost well over $800,000. And it cost us $25,000 to learn that we couldn't get any money. So I just want to make sure. I know DeHuey they're bonded in Pennsylvania, so we want to make sure. Okay.
I assume that would have had to have been in the bid documents if we wanted to stipulate that. Is that right?
We did have bonding, whatever. I don't know the exact details.
No, but you're right, Mr. Sirota. It would have had to have been in the bid, and if it's not in Pennsylvania, then I assume we would have to rebid if it's not in Pennsylvania. So we can certainly look into that and see where the bonding is.
Because if this claim goes and Mudd loses, they can say, well, we're bankrupt, and if the job's half done, then or they have our money, say goodbye. It happens. Not your fault, Bob. I'm just angry because it happened over across the street.
Okay, so look into that. Any other comments or questions on this item? All right, so pending that, Stan and Mike will move that forward so you'll report on that on Monday night. Okay. Next up, the update on the Jarrettstown water main break.
Yes, I just put this in here more for informational purposes. While looking over budget reviews, exercises going through expenses for the current year, I realized the water usage at Jarrettstown was quite high this year, much above expectations. And actually, the past several months, it's been on the order of the same amount of water we'd use at Sandy Run. So we knew we had a problem. We sent the plumber in, talked to the custodians, and we went through the building. We cannot find any leaks within the building that would be causing our bills to be so high. And it's not only just the water bill, but our sewer bill is also based on the amount of water that we were billed. So it was the two factors that it just sent a red flag up looking at the budget numbers. Well, why are we spending so much here? Let's get in and really dig what's going on. The water main for Jarrettstown is quite long. It comes out of the back of the building, and the meter pit is all the way back on Kenmare. So there's at least 500 feet of underground piping that is ours between the meter pit and the school itself. We did some preliminary investigation. It's looking like that line is leaking somewhere. We thought we found a soft spot in the dirt. We dug it up, and we didn't have any active leak. Our next process is we have next Friday, with the early dismissal, we have a company coming in that actually specializes in underground water leaks, where they have the detection equipment that from the surface, they'll be able to tell us, pinpoint any leaks. We're confident something is going on. We shut the valves off inside the building, and our water meter is still spinning away in the pit. So it's going somewhere. We don't know where. If we don't act on this, it's going to cost us a significant amount of money just in the wastewater and sewer bills. So we are investigating this, and hopefully in another week or so we'll have a good answer and everything will be repaired. It's a long process, but we're on top of it.
Comments or questions? Dan?
Did you contact any neighbors and see if they're getting water in their basements?
No, the school sets well away. In an area we actually thought we were surprised, one of the neighbors Their driveway is below our property, and we actually searched around their property to see if any water is running out of their retaining wall, and there wasn't anything. We were out there, Hirschberg Mechanical worked with us one day, on Monday. They were out on site with us, hoping that we could locate something, and they were unable. So instead of just throwing good money out there in attempts to find something, and instead of paying mechanics out there just to taking guesses where this could be, we decided to pull back a little bit and bring a professional company in who specializes in this. And any money we're spending is going to be well saved on what we're losing through the water.
When did you notice these, or did personnel notice these bills all of a sudden?
I noticed back in December that the bills were high. Andy had asked us to go through our expenses if we needed to do any budget transfers. So it's really looking at what our expenses were to what had budgeted for the year. Looking at a monthly bill, when all the bills come in, it really wasn't that great. But when you see the total number, what we're spending against the other buildings on the budget side of things, it made it stand out enough that it warranted an investigation.
Yes. So there was no difference in the summertime, and when obviously this consumption would be so much lower that all of a sudden you're like, wow.
Correct.
So it
Consumption's
wasn't
lower.
happening during the summer?
Not that we can
Nothing
tell.
jumped out? No grass was growing real high in one
No,
section?
no.
My other question is, how deep is the line?
It depends on which section of the property you are. The first that we dug is about 4 feet in the area of the pit. Might be some places where it's a little higher, some maybe a little shallower. As we get towards the building, there is a little hill. The last main repaired, I think it was about 6 feet down.
Is there a closer location that we could put in a new line, or that we would just have to put a new line right next to?
If we were to run a new line, it would be right along where you're doing it now, but it is a 4-inch cast iron main. So it's a main that should last a long time. We just probably have a very slight crack somewhere, just losing enough water, not enough that it's surfacing, but we're losing it enough that it's noticeable on the water bills.
Anyone else? All right. Well, it's good to hear our budgetary process may have revealed, even if it's just a little something, it's a little something. Next up, we have the Traversa contract addendum. Is that you or is that Chris?
So I'm going to invite Mr. Robbins to come up. Again, the contract is small dollars, but I brought Chris in to talk about the parent application that he's going to be rolling out and how this all kind of pieces together. So,
okay. So with our routing software, it works currently with Infinite Campus, and Infinite Campus is where you're going to get your main transportation information as far as overall for your students. But the day-to-day piece would be through the parent application. But in order to roll it out and give the community what they deserve as far as information about their students' transportation, there's one piece that wasn't in our original plan, and that's the electronic rollout sheet. And what that will do is it'll actually give you estimated arrival times to the bus stop based upon the bus that is doing that run that day. So without that, I would say the parent application would be flawed, and adding this piece, I think it gets us our overall goal. So it's about, well, it's going to be a little under $1,300 this year, but then it'll be $2,000 moving forward.
and the only thing I add, I think we're hearing, like Mr. Robbins said, largely that transportation can do better at communicating, and I think we agree. And this app, I think, brings us a long way as far as keeping parents updated, being able to communicate. They don't, we don't have 40 people calling the transportation office if a bus is running behind. They can, hopefully everyone's using this app. They will use this app, and they'll be able to see, when the bus will arrive, and it'll go a long way with communications across the community.
Comments or questions? Dan?
Mr. Robbins, we haven't seen you in a while. could you give us, which I guess is good.
Yeah.
But could you give us an update on if there was any issues from parents on tardiness? Because I remember last year we had a gigantic group
beginning
here.
of the year?
At the beginning of the year. But so everything is running nice and smoothly in terms of also with the bus drivers, you have enough personnel?
Personnel-wise, right now, we are in good shape, a lot better shape than we were a year ago. All of our permanent driving positions are filled, and we do have a very small substitute pool. But as far as timeliness issues, obviously, we do have some obstacles with Sandy Run, and we're working on improving those issues, to make things safer for both parents, students, and our drivers, and in order to get the buses in on time, without creating too much of a hassle for the parents. But other than those hiccups, you're always going to have, every now and then something that comes up, but things have been fairly quiet since the beginning of the year.
Other comments or questions, Titia?
This add-on or this Traversa contract amendment, is this something that wasn't available when we first started with this, or how can you talk us through the order of how this came together?
Yeah, this new piece actually wasn't available originally, but it's something that arose from complaints from other customers that were using the parent application and weren't able to provide updated information. For example, if a bus were to not start and that run be covered in another bus, it's still showing that the assigned bus is sitting at the garage. So they're not getting an actual estimated arrival time to the stop, and that caused a lot of complaints and made them look into what they could do to better serve their customers. So.
And I think, Chris, the parent application was not something you intended to roll out day one, right? We needed to get the software up and running first, and then the parent application was always going to be a secondary rollout phase.
Yeah. Our vetting process took a little longer than expected. So getting the information out into our student information system, we knew was going to be a challenge. And so there was no way we were going to be able to roll out the parent app day one. My initial hope was to have it start, January 1st, but unfortunately it didn't work out because it would have been flawed.
So do the parents have anything at this point? I don't have kids riding buses, so can you tell?
Currently, they have their estimated time, the scheduled time, and the bus information in Infinite Campus. This would be an additional piece that would give them their day-to-day information.
Just to clarify for the public, we've made this statement before, but this is not showing where the bus is on a map. This is showing what time the bus will arrive at your stop, right?
Correct, yeah. For safety reasons, in my opinion, showing where the bus is opens us up as a soft target, and I don't want that for our district.
Other, Jen?
Where do parents see this? Is it in Infinite Campus?
No, this would be, once we roll this out, a community newsletter would go out, and it would give you the website to log in, register, and then it'll also give you a link that you could download an application on your smartphone. And it also comes with a messenger piece so that we could give you instant messages, to an individual student rather than an entire bus.
So it looks like the contract is written to take effect immediately. How quickly do we expect to roll this out?
The goal is to have everything out to the public by the end of February. Our plan is to test it with some employees in the district that have students that attend Upper Dublin schools, just so that we have a test pool, and then we would open it up to the public.
All right, other comments or questions? Okay, Mike, Stan, we'll move that forward to the legislative meeting. All right, thanks, Chris. Moving on to the finance reports and recommendations, starting with the treasurer's report and budget transfers.
Yeah, so the treasurer's report, I mean, there's nothing substantial to highlight. Everything's trending exactly as we would expect it to. So 80% of budgeted revenues received, very similar to prior year. Expenditures year to date are right in line at 41%. So nothing, unless there's further questions, I don't intend to cover that in any more detail. And then I'll also go through budget transfers. At least at a high level, again, budget transfers, I want to just talk about what they are since we have some new folks. We're not going to walk through every line item on here, but just to understand what a budget transfer is. So we talked about budget tonight. So every year the board approves a budget. And as Dr. Yanni mentioned, a budget is a plan of how we expect the year to go, and things don't always go exactly as you had planned. So the budget's based on estimates, and the flexibility that we need is handled through the budget transfer process. So all of our budget owners, departments, principals, go through their budget. They own it this year, so we're giving them accountability for their budget, accountability to review their budget, and then responsibility to make sure they transfer funds as needed to cover areas where they've not budgeted cleanly or appropriately, or where something didn't go as planned. What I would want to make clear is that budget transfers is not a spend down process. So this isn't like I have $1,000 over here and I'm going to spend it because I have it. This is truly a review of their budget and needs that they have in order to get through the year, and then they make appropriate transfers to cover that. And that's being done with oversight from Ms. Baldessano in the business office. So certainly we still play a part and review before it gets here to the board for approval. And that's kind of the process that we go through for budgetary transfers. So,
Mr. Leckman, can I say just a few words? Sure. So last year when we started teaching the principals and department leaders to do their budgets, it was a heavy lift. And so I do want to applaud Ms. Baldessano because she always took care of the budgetary transfers at the end of the year. Now that we're increasing, as Mr. Leckman said, as we're increasing the accountability, principals and budget controllers are now having to submit budget transfers. As they get better at budgeting, we'll see fewer and fewer transfers being needed over time.
Am I correct that in the past, we've normally seen this later in the year than we're seeing it now?
Yeah, that's my understanding. It's typically later in the year. My philosophy is we do this throughout the year to keep up with. We don't wait till the end of the year and then move a bunch of money around to cover where we've overspent the budget. We want folks monitoring and reviewing their budget on a regular basis and making sure they're making decisions about where do I need to spend less because I needed to spend a little more over here. So it'll be a regular process throughout the year.
Okay, and to clarify, for the board's purpose, so when that happens periodically through the year, we will have to approve each of those, right?
That's correct, yeah. Every periodically when we do it, we'll bring it here, it'll be approved. There will still be, you'll see on here, there's two separate files, just to point that out. There's one for 18-19 and one for the current year 19-20. There will still be a cleanup that's done as part of the audit at the end of the year, but I would assume that would be much less than what we have here. But yes, it'll be a regular basis that'll need to be approved by the board.
Anyone? Titia?
Just a general question. As Dr. Yanni said, the whole budget is handled by the individual buildings principals. How is that going? I mean, is this year feeling much better? Is there confidence in this whole process that's growing? I mean, what's your take on that?
My take on it is it's a learning process. It's an iterative process that's going to take time. I feel very comfortable that everyone has has taken the preliminary budget process seriously. They understand the financial challenges that we have in front of us. It's definitely a learning process, and some folks still need to take a little harder look at their budget, but I feel like everyone's on board. Everyone took the budget transfer process very seriously when we asked them to do it for this meeting, so I think it's going well, with much room for improvement.
It's changing the conversation because before, it was just spend, and everyone knew at the end of the year, Jen would do her magic and move money around. This has really fostered collaboration between the principals and a lot of, I would say, better and more productive dialogue between district office and the principals, because if they want or need to buy something and there isn't money in an account, the conversation is no longer, well, we're going to run that account into the red. The conversation is, analyze your budget, tell me where you can take money from, and keep in mind that as we're going through the budget process, last year I would give us a B plus as a leadership team as we were working with them, learning how to do the budget. We're keeping good notes of where things have been over budgeted this year. So as our own checks and balances, so that when we're working with principals and supervisors and directors, that we're able to have sometimes those challenging or difficult conversations about not over budgeting in a certain area.
But that also suggests, maybe I'm wrong with that, but I'm hopeful that in the years to come, that things are going to be pretty tight, and there's not that flexibility that has been there before.
Andy's like a dog with a bone when it comes to certain things. Andy's been doing visits to schools, looking in corners and hidden spots to see what's available. And so what I will say, as our principals did their first run of the budget this year, their first looks looked much better on the whole than they did the first time last year.
Other comments or questions on that? All right, so we'll move those forward, and we'll look forward to seeing those more regularly in the future. Next up, bond sale summary and rating review.
Yeah, so this is just informational. There's no action that needs to be taken, but since the last time we met, a lot has happened regarding the financing for Sandy Run Middle School. The process has always begins with a review with Moody's. Moody's is the rating agency that assigns a rating for, you can have Moody's or S&P, but we have Moody's as our rating agencies for our bond issues. So on Tuesday, December 10th, we had our call with Moody's, and they ask lots of questions about finances and trends and things we're working on as a district. They look at the strength of the economy and the strength of your local municipality. And then the rating was issued on December 18th, and what you have in here is both the rating that we received from Moody's and the write-up, and you also have the actual pricing of the bonds, which occurred on January 6th.
I just interrupt real briefly. I do think we saw the rating Moody's result last month, but it's not here on this agenda.
It's part of the bond
it's in the bond sale document.
Yeah,
Okay,
we did not have it for the last meeting because it wasn't issued until December 18th.
So just the summary is here, not the full document. Yeah.
So we the good news is we maintained our rating of the AA3, which is the fourth highest rating that you can receive. And I think it's important, which I noted in a memo to the board, is the reasons leading to our rating. We obviously have a strong, large tax base with above average resident wealth and income. The challenges that they noted are elevated debt burden, expected to remain, so they expect and we do as well, expect our debt burden to remain high as we build Sandy Run Middle School. Factors that they tell us what could lead to an upgrade and what could lead to a downgrade, and I think that's especially important as we're being prepared for our largest borrowing for the project. So the plan is in January of 2021 to have our large borrowing for the project, so we need to be very mindful to make sure we're doing everything to keep our rating the same. So, things they list for an upgrade would be moderation of elevated debt position, so and positive financial trends. So I think the work we're doing around budget and anything we can do to save and come out with a positive outcome this year will help with the discussion as we move into the next bond issue. They also note factors for a downgrade as failure to manage increased debt burden, resulting in structurally imbalanced operations, significant decline in reserves, and any contraction of the tax base. So if we have large tax assessment appeals, some of that could lead to downgrades. So we need to be mindful of that for the next year or so, especially. I will say with the pricing, all members of our financial team were very happy with the way the pricing went. So PFM's original, they're our financial advisor, their original estimate was that the issue would cost us, it was a $10 million issue. They estimated it would cost about $16.7 million, so, principal and interest. And the final cost was about $15.23 million. So it was a savings about $1.5 million over the 25-year borrowing period. So that's a win for us. It's good. PFM's typically conservative in their estimates. So while it's good over the long term, I just want to make sure everyone understands on the short term, it's about $50,000 a year is the saving. So this isn't a close the budget item, but I think it's good in the long term over the 25-year period. So the settlement of the bonds will occur on February 11th. That just means that's when we will receive the funds into our account. And then the next issue will be January 2021 if everything stays on schedule. Questions? Dan?
Andy, do you think, having a large year-end balance fund, okay, right now you're predicting not, is that what it is? Is that what you're thinking it's going to be? The year-end balance fund would be about $2-3 million?
So based on the budget, I think it's around $3 million is where we would end up. Historically, budgets are conservative and we'll end up slightly better than what we had planned.
We would be in a better position for this borrowing in 2021, the largest one, if we had a higher year-end budget surplus or, balance, say something like $8 million.
I don't know that anyone could put a number on it and determine what Moody's wants to see. Certainly, the larger balance of reserves you have available, the more favorably Moody's looks on it. It's not the only factor that they look at. There's a number of factors that they consider.
I guess what I'm saying, could we delay any money transfers for capital improvements temporarily until the offer is made, and then after we get the bond rating and all that kind of stuff, then transfer those monies out of the operating budget or the capital budget?
So my recommendation is that we do not transfer any money to the capital reserve fund until we move closer to the end of the year and we have a sense on how our projections through the end of the year are starting to look. Absolutely.
But isn't it the case? Moody's not just looking at that budget item, they're looking at our entire assets and liabilities, whether it's in capital or in general fund balance. That's not going to be a...
I don't think it'll matter either way, certainly, but based on the question, will we move money? My recommendation would be we don't move any money until we know what the end of the year looks like. But yes, you're absolutely right. They look at all of our reserves, not just one fund.
Other comments or questions? All right, so thank you for that update. That continues the trend of those bond sales going well for us, and hopefully they will next year as well.
Wait.
Yes.
Did we get the interest rate on that January 6th?
Yeah, it's in the document.
What is it?
Well, it varies.
Well,
It varies based on, so as you go out further, the interest rates increase. So it's every year there's a different interest rate that is issued, and
so 1.2 to, well, if you're looking at the coupon rate, it's 1.2% to 4%. The highest issues are up to 4%. If you're looking at the yield, the highest issues are 2.36%.
Is that what we were looking at?
I think it's less than what PFM was projecting.
I think she had 6, I'm going from memory, but I think she had 6 down the hole.
Because the interest rates are trending down lower now, they're starting to go down again.
Certainly, interest rates going down did help with this borrowing, absolutely.
All right, any other comments or questions? Okay, moving on to the Eastern budget. We saw a presentation earlier.
Right, and all this was we heard a presentation. This was just to make sure we took action to move this to the board for final consideration. And it lists in here everything that we heard tonight. The $584,489 would be our total costs based on their current budget presentation.
So comments or questions? Okay, so we will move that forward to Monday's meeting. Next up, the agreement with Austil's Rehabilitation Services.
This contract is to provide behavioral services for a student in one of our elementary schools. This student has some significant challenges, and without this support, we would need to provide an alternate setting in an approved private school for this child. With our work with including students and really embodying the belief that every student who lives in Upper Dublin should be educated in Upper Dublin, we are asking the board to approve this contract. This contract is flexible, and so we have the ability to end the contract with a 60-day notice period. But we do believe, looking at the services that Austil's will provide, we will be able to not only educate this child, but help the child become extremely successful.
So to be clear, this is bringing in outside services from Theraplay into our building. Okay.
And just for clarity, these are services we currently do not provide on our own staff, so there's no labor issue with contracting out.
Comments or questions? Titia?
Has the district worked with this organization before?
Yes, and I've worked with them in other districts as well. They're the premier provider for contracted services.
Anyone else? Okay, so we'll move that one forward to the legislative meeting. Next up, the contract renewal for Frontline.
Frontline, this is a renewal. Frontline's a critical software package that's used for absence management, time and attendance, and special education IEP software. The current agreement has been renewing each year, auto-renewing. So Ms. Kitten is doing a lot of review of contracts that have come up in her department area. And the auto renewals have historically seen an increase of about 6%. While it may not seem like much, she was able to negotiate a fixed cost increase of 4% per year. So again, not savings, but a cost avoidance of about $5,253.
Comments or questions? All right, and obviously, they're comfortable being locked into Frontline for 3 years then?
Yes, they are.
Okay. So we'll move that one forward to the legislative meeting. Update to Power School.
Yes, so Power School is our financial and human resources software system of record. Cognos is the reporting engine that sits behind it. So there are standard reports that are available to us in the system, and standard reports only go so far. Cognos allows us to run our own reports that we make up. We use it for budget purposes. We use it for staffing purposes. It's a critical reporting tool for us. Power School is no longer supporting the version of the software that we're running on. So we're being forced to upgrade to the latest version, and the contract provides the upgrade cost plus training for our necessary users that need to be trained on it. So the total cost is $4,110.
Comments or questions? Stan?
Did they say how long this upgrade will be honored before they upgrade again and force us to get another fee from us?
I don't know, Jen, if you have any thoughts on that, but I don't know that we go through a ton of upgrades with them.
Well, I know with Cognos, it hasn't been upgraded since I've been here. I think we were still in the original version when we got or purchased SunGuard that went to Power School. So it's
we've been on this version for a long time, and they actually stopped the software, I mean, they stopped supporting it in 2018, but PowerSchool has been sort of limping along, keeping it running, but they said as of the end of June of 2020, they cannot support it any longer. So it is a important tool that we use for the HR and finances and with benefits as well. So once we do upgrade, then I think we'll be on this version for a long time. It doesn't change that much, but it's the browser and other things.
Anyone else? Okay, that's good to get us up to date every once in a while anyway. So we'll move that one forward. We have 2 agreements with Valbridge Property Advisors.
Yep, so we have two properties that we are in the assessment appeal review with. They have both applied for appeals with the Board of Assessments, and both were denied, and they've appealed that to the Court of Common Pleas standard appeal process. So the board, as part of our due diligence, would do an appraisal on both of these properties. So it's 455 Maryland Drive and 500 Virginia Drive. I also note here that based on the property's value, the property owner valuation, 455 Maryland we would lose about $30,000 annually if it's approved at their assessed value. 500 Virginia Drive would be $365,000 annually if it's approved at their value. So an appraisal for $5,000 and $4,500 is a critical tool for us to have to work through this process.
Valbridge, the company that we usually use for this service?
It is, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Stan?
Andy, we're splitting these costs, right, with the township?
We do not. We pay for these.
So if we win this, so we get the appraisal, do we share this information with the township? And do they benefit from this appraisal that we're paying for?
An assessment appeal changes the assessed value of a property, so the answer is yes. The assessed value is the same for the school district, the municipality, and the county.
Okay, well then, what we should do is let the township pay for one of the 2 assessment fees. That's what we should do. We should demand that.
We could discuss that with them at a future meeting when we get together regularly to discuss things like that. Historically, this is the way we've always done it. We get the vast majority of property tax revenue, and I think that's why it's usually on us to shoulder this burden, comparatively small burden. But we can certainly have that discussion in the future. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so we'll move those forward, and the spring sports bid.
This is just a standard item going through our bidding process. So sports supplies and equipment bids are standard items that we do for each sports season. This is coordinated with the athletic director and our business office. Vendors bid on items. It needs to be awarded to the lowest responsible bidder. We review it, we bring this list before the board, and the board is required to approve all bids. So we bring the spring sports bid for approval.
Comments or questions? Okay, we'll move that one forward, and it is time for community input. Know the drill.
I get shorter every time I come up here. Anita Brister, Fort Washington. A couple of comments and maybe one question. Mr. Leckman, did you say that the current Moody's rating is the same as what we've, well, you don't have to answer right now, but is it the same as what it's been for at least the last year?
It is.
Okay. I wanted to comment on Dr. Yanni's opening comments on the budget presentation and just say that I really appreciate that you are using the survey results to make improvements in how the budget process, how the presentations are done with more transparency, because you saw apparently you saw in the survey results that that's what people were asking for. And maybe more clarity too, I don't know if I'm putting words in there. I had a comment on slide, I think it's number 16, our page is not, I think it's slide 16, but anyway, the heading is major budget pressures. So it's the slide about the wages, the medical, the prescription, pursers, debt service, et cetera. I mean, this is pretty obvious to me. I don't know if I'm incorrect in any way. Somebody can correct me after. But it certainly seems that the teacher's contract is contributing to the structural deficit. And for the benefit of anybody who doesn't know, this was only a year ago. It was last January that the teacher's contract was negotiated. So it wasn't like it was 5 years ago. And then you can see, well, for example, if you just add together the wages, the medical, the prescription, all things that are negotiated into, it's not, I'm pointing this out to say the state doesn't step down to districts and say, oh, you have to do this. Okay, those three items alone are over 2 million, slightly over 2 million, and then of course it extends out for 3 years. So a slightly more conservative teacher's contract, we wouldn't have had as big of a deficit. And there's a certain board member who doesn't happen to be here tonight, but he's always blaming the state for just about everything. And then sometimes other board members jump on that bandwagon and, oh, the state doesn't give us enough. I just want to point out here that that structural deficit certainly seems to be related to slightly unaffordable teacher's contract. And that was negotiated by the board, and it's going to continue, it's going to keep that deficit going. This is maybe also apparent too, but maybe not, because I don't know how much history some people have. That happened before, and that was a bigger deficit was created. It happened with a contract in 2010, and the problems weren't as apparent right away, but as of 2013, that's the year that led to 10 furloughs and 10 demotions. Because as Mr. Leckman's pointed out, and I think most people get this, a school district budget has to be balanced at the end of the day, which is the end of June. So I'm not predicting that that's going to happen. I don't know that this structural deficit is that high compared to what we had in 2013. I hope it's not. But I'm just saying you have to be really careful when you do contracts. You might want to be really, really generous, but it has to be affordable in the sense that if you go overboard, you're not helping anybody. You're not helping children or teachers, because that's what happened in the not too distant past. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Seeing nobody else, we will close community input. Dr. Yanni, or do you have is there any comments on any?
Other than the Moody's rating, as Mr. Sirota stayed the same. And in terms of the structural deficit, budget deficit, Mr. Leckman and I both come from the perspective that as we look to close the deficit that's there, it's not just about raising taxes. We also need to look at the budget and inside and do, expenditure decreases where we can and look for alternate ways to increase some revenue. Arguably, if anyone had the magic bullet for increasing revenue beyond raising taxes, they'd be a millionaire, because it's very difficult in a school district. But rest assured that as we look at the budget, there will be recommendations for reductions in expenditures, not just looking at increased taxes.
All right, any other final comments or questions from anybody? Okay, our next Finance Committee will be Wednesday, February 19th at 6 p.m. right here in the Cardinal Room, and we are adjourned. Thank you.